Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Bobby Malab, and together with Adina Jacobs are the very proud co-founders of Mentor Walks. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to the Mentor Walks iconic conversation series on the topic of insights in women's leadership. Before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my deepest respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and to all elders wherever you are over Australia. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Bianca Hartge-Hazelman, who is the founder and CEO of Financy. Financy is an innovative organisation that measures and facilitates gender equality. It's best known for the Financy Women's Index, a quarterly report on financial equality and progress across Australia. And she's about to launch a web app called Impactful that is supporting organisations in their diversity and inclusion efforts. She's the mum of 3 daughters and, like many of you on the call, a massive juggler of all the things that life brings us. Later in the conversation, we'll also be hearing from Joanne Block. Joanne is one of Mentor Walk's mentors, both in Sydney and in Wollongong. Her career has been very much dedicated to financial advice and particularly helping women with their superannuation and superannuation in general. She's had an amazing career that spanned senior roles at Mercer, whether it's leading their innovation business in the US, their financial advice business, and most recently, Mercer's administration services business in Wollongong. She's been the CEO of the Financial Planning Association and is currently a non-executive director on many boards, including a number of startups and Colonial First State. So I'm going to introduce Bianca, but also I would like to remind you that this conversation's record is hosted on YouTube, which is a channel that you'll find all Mentor Walk's previous iconic conversation series. There's sessions there on taming the imposter and imposter syndrome, identifying your strengths, preparing for a job interview. It is a treasure trove of the things that affect us as women with careers. And also, please be aware that we will email you after this session with a survey, and it helps us enormously if you take the time to fill that in. It's very quick. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Bianca Hartge-Hazelman. Over to you, Bianca.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here and hoping everybody can hear me okay. I'm sure you let me know if I cut out or anything like that. I wanted to begin by saying boldly, I've always thought of myself as a leader. And I want you to think for a minute how that makes you feel hearing another woman say, I am a leader. Does it make you feel good? Does it make you think that's a bit much for me? I'm curious to know that. And when I talk about myself as being a leader, for me, it's been about listening to that little voice inside of me that has believed that I could, that has got agitated around ideas, that wanted to do something a bit different, create different things in teams. But interestingly, I didn't actually become a leader until I tapped into my purpose. And the purpose for me is that stone in my shoe that has agitated me, that has got me out of bed in the morning, even when I've had zilch sleep from getting up at night for my girls, that desire to really want to make a genuine difference for women around gender equality. I have no MBA. I have master's degrees and other degrees, but certainly not in the business and leadership space. I am an entrepreneur, and maybe an accidental entrepreneur at that. I was recently named by LinkedIn as one of their top voices on gender equity, which came as a surprise to me. I even asked myself, are we sure? How do you judge that? So it's been interesting for me, my journey on leadership. Getting to this point has been really hard, and you hear everyone has their difficulty journey, but it's been a leadership journey where I've often not been paid at all. It's just been driven by purpose. And that might be unfathomable to think of, but it's actually it's that purpose that has actually had me thinking not even of money at times. It has been about the desire for impact, which might come across kind of crazy, but it's what's kept me solid in pursuit, and I think has been critical. My career started as a finance journalist, so I never saw myself as being a CEO of a company. I was working at the Financial Review at the time of having my first daughter, then second daughter, tapped on the shoulder around the time that everyone at Fairfax was taking redundancies or voluntary redundancies. And I was asked what were my intentions about staying with the company while on maternity leave. So that was interesting and a light bulb moment for me as a woman. I felt like I was getting told that I could do my 12 months on maternity leave, or I could take advantage of this potential windfall of money to do something else, or come back and start writing more and more for the paper. So that was really interesting. I don't talk a lot about that, but I think it's something a lot of women relate to in their career journey. For me, it plunged me into Financy. It made me want to write about women's finances and all different things like that. And that company today has grown as I've grown around purpose. And as I was introduced before, we were known for the Women's Index, which is a quarterly report on women's economic equality. It has a media reach of about 1 million per quarter, which is huge for a startup and for this report that we do. And then we're about to launch this product called the Impactor, which is all around DEI solutions and helping companies measure and track their performance. So the bigger picture with these things is around that impact and helping support gender equity. In the context of this, I guess I'm sharing my leadership story in the hope that I can give you insights into some of the data that I'm always looking at, both with my journalistic hat on, but as a researcher that is informing this tech software we're developing around inclusion and building those leadership teams. To help you advance into leadership so that you can say with your own voice, I am a leader that absolutely, fundamentally, without doubt, deserves to be here. Now, leadership has historically been, and we don't really need to go too much into it, it's been defined by men, this blokey language, masculine traits, the alpha male boys club. So, and as women and men, we have admired this and in many forms rewarded this traditionally for centuries. And research tends to suggest that women who then replicate that form of leadership are not otherwise rewarded to the same extent. So there's a line that can be crossed for women in leadership. And we saw that, I suppose, an interesting example of this for me was around the 2016 presidential race, Trump versus Hillary Clinton. I remember being at the local coffee shop and I had somehow wrongfully gotten myself into this debate about who was going to win and blah, blah, blah. The kind of conversation you wish you hadn't started. An elderly man jumped in and he said, well, Trump's going to win because you need someone strong in the role. You need a man in the role. And I was agitated for a number of reasons, regardless of who I would have voted for, regardless. I took offense that a woman couldn't be seen as strong. And that, for me, is really that reinforcement of strength, that masculine traits. It perpetuates gender inequality. It perpetuates a stereotype that has many organizations leaping for an easy fix to roles that need to be expanded to see the benefits of having more women in leadership positions. I took offense on many levels for that. And I suppose where I'm at when I think about that is, what do female leaders, what have I learned from female leaders of all my years spent researching them, looking at different traits that they may have across paid and unpaid work and education, all these different spheres I look at through the Women's Index. I've become so convinced that female leadership needs to be redefined. We need greater icons for what female leaders are, rather than a replication of something else that may have been historically built by men. For this to happen, we certainly absolutely need more women in leadership who walk their own path, who use their unique energy, their unique voice unashamedly, and even though this is difficult, unquestionably their own truth in decision making. And it gets me kind of thinking, and I wanted to put to you, who is your female hero? Just last week, we were talking in the media a lot about Julia Gillard and her 10 years since that great misogyny speech. I was thinking of her as I was writing this. I was thinking of her as a leader, and I was thinking then of Kylie Minogue as a leader. Both women who were largely rejected by the masses, if you can remember as much as me at the outset, in many camps, and now celebrated for what it is that they stand for. It's almost like we put many women to task and question whether they're deserving until we decide that they are. It's like that phrase I said to you at the beginning, I am a leader, and I wanted to know if that made you cringe or made you want to support. Women, we can almost be our own worst enemy with some things when it comes to leadership. And it's something to be mindful of in the perpetuation of gender stereotypes. I suppose with role modeling, for me, my role models, I look a lot to people like Brené Brown, Jacinda Ardern, other world leaders, and from a professional point of view and also from a personal point of view in my own family home. A book I will shout out to is Brené Brown's Dare to Lead, just points in it, not saying you go buy it because I haven't read it to the full yet. I've only read samples. But what I loved from her takeaways is that around that point that future leaders need to be brave and courageous. And I really resonate with that because it's this element of fearlessness, of courage, that it's going to take female leaders if we are going to break this cyclical, let me rephrase that, break this cycle of inequality that currently has us at about 130 years to getting anywhere at a global point in time, and to really change the dynamics as we see them. So I suppose I just wanted to throw those things out to get us all thinking about where we could go with this discussion. I have a number of actions that I'd like to put to you today to challenge the way you think about leadership, to actually execute on in your day-to-day, but importantly, to reflect on the way you see yourself as a leader that deserves to be here, that needs to learn and grow both professionally and personally along the way, that is an inclusive leader, that's a we leader, not an I leader. And even myself, I challenge myself along those lines, because I am an entrepreneur with a smaller team, answerable to a lot of mentors and committee members. I have to remind myself of the we, even though my immediate smaller team tends to make me think of the I. Then there's also a need to be empathetic as well, and to actually embrace that, particularly with new research showing that that is really an advantageous trait for women. And then reinforcing as we go through this need to really walk your own path, and to do so with purpose, that I alluded to at the very beginning. So that's just some of the things I wanted to talk about in the context of which I'd like to go there today with you, if you're ready.
Thank you. There's so much coming out of that. Please put any questions in the chat. I know that people are already commenting. Maya Angelou is a fabulous choice as a leader and hero, and some endorsements for the book by Brené Brown. So thanks, Bianca. But I have a few questions for you. Bianca and I go way back, by the way. She interviewed me at the AFR through the Financial Planning Association, where I was having a pretty rough time. But Bianca, you were always a very reasonable journalist, and you really got the issues. You didn't try to be aggressive. You didn't try to do the one-upmanship. And I think there's something we can come back to in that. I now sit on the advisory board for Financy, and it is just a treasure trove of information. I'd love you to talk about some of the drivers of gender parity that that the Financy Women's Index is heading to, and that Impactor will help organisations uncover, because I think that will also encourage greater leadership. You talked about women need to change the dynamic, but to do that, we also need to get equal pay, we need to be more present, we need to think about part-time work and so on. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about the data, the gender parity issues and the 7 drivers that we're looking to address.
I'll just start by, I think I'll share a slide on this and it's not that I like to overly talk to slides, but sometimes I think they just help in cementing home a point. So when we look at the index, in the context that I look at that, I try to put things into timeframes so we can build policies and look at ideas that can affect these timeframes. So our weight for gender equality, if you can see this, is sitting at about 59 years in Australia, and that's based on the worst performing area of unpaid work. In leadership, we're looking at just the ASX 200 now. We're looking at a gap of 6.5 years. Now, I caution around that, and we're looking at this data all the time. It's based on the annual growth rate since 2012. But since 2018, it's like the shine came off the Me Too movement, time's up, and we started to slip into this fatiguing, saddle where that pace of progress has really slowed in female leadership. And there's so much data that's talking to that right now. And my concern is the longer that 6.2 years takes to actually happen, it's really looking like it's triple that amount, to be frank with you. And it's something we're watching really closely, and it will force us to maybe remodel a few things because of this real significant slowdown, largely as a result of the fatigue factor coming off Me Too and things like that, but also this pandemic and the impact of that on pipelines. So that's 2 interesting things I'm calling out there for the index. Unpaid work is by far one of the biggest factors that holds back women's workplace participation and our ability to push the barrier in leadership to participate. And it is so utterly frustrating. And at the same time, there's an element to unpaid work that also needs to be respected. There's choice, there's a greater need for balance. So there's structural things there that can facilitate better outcomes for women, like your flexible work arrangements, like your paid parental leave, things that are happening now, improved childcare arrangements that will make life easier for the working female leader, and will hopefully reduce that unpaid work timeframe as well. We have seen that move a little bit during the pandemic. We have seen men's hours in unpaid work increase, which is a good thing. And what we need to see is for that dynamic to continue to change. I'm not saying that we need to get to a point of 50-50, because I don't know if we will, in the sense that not all women will want to be leaders. Not all women will want to get back to work 6-12 months in after having a child, and nor should they have to really be forced into that situation to do so. So I think there will be a happier medium, hopefully struck if we continue to push, where men and women find some kind of balance there. That's our hope anyway, through the index and the economists that are working with me on it. So I suppose going into other data, and I'll stop sharing that now, what also catches my eye and resonate with is data that's coming out of chief executive women. The latest census, you may have seen that in the press. I really picked up on this because I look at the pipeline and I think about that in the context of what we've had with the pandemic and how it's set women back and what that means for who's in these executive leadership teams that are there now, and are they in the right roles? And when I say the right roles, what we know about the pipeline is that we need to see more women in these P&L roles, these line management type roles. But as it stands, these critical feeder roles, as which they're called, according to Chief Executive Women, there were only 18 female CEOs in the entire ASX 300 this year. And I think that has actually just dropped again. And in terms of those line roles, that is, I think it's something like about 15% of the ASX 300. So 15% of that consists of women in key line roles that could one day, that are more likely to be seen as CEO candidates. And that is something we really need to change. Why is that the case? Well, we know that women tend to gravitate, not always, but gravitate to roles that are not line roles. So they might be HR, marketing, finance, which, is not typically seen, your accounting kind of role is not typically seen as a feeder role. So the nature of the work that we're doing isn't getting given that P&L responsibility. Is there an argument there for those roles, however, to be given more P&L responsibility in order to help widen that pipeline, the traditional way in which we see today's CEO as being truly credible, as having had that other line role experience? Do we need to rethink that? And I would argue to some degree, yes. Organisations perhaps need to broaden that scope in terms of P&L responsibility to assist with the pipeline and the wealth of women that might be in those other type roles that are often ignored for those CEO type positions. So this is really interesting data that when we look at that, and it's something that's happening globally. There's something like 5% of female CEOs running global 500 companies. And so research just shows us that building that pipeline is not easy. But I think there is a great argument that companies themselves need to make some adjustments, despite being faced with financial pressures and how they can, quickly hire the best talent, which sees them perpetuate gender stereotypes. And women also, we also need to push harder in order to challenge this perception that P&L responsibility should only go to certain types of roles. So that's something I wanted to put there, and I found very interesting when looking at the data. The other thing I found very interesting is that there's a traditional school of thought that high potential mentoring programs, leadership education programs are sufficient on their own to support female leaders. And I'm really big on promoting these types of programs because I actually see them as being a critical piece of the puzzle, but they're not the only piece of the puzzle. But I wanted to raise that there because I found this particular article a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because we can fall into the trap of telling women, you've got to get a mentor, you've got to, and this, I know this is mentor work, so all due respect, I don't mean it disrespectfully at all. You've got to do this networking, you've got to do that. But there's almost like there's a whole pie here that we need to be talking about, that research is increasingly showing. It's not easy for women when you add up all these different things. But again, it comes back to this need to redefine the female leader and to bring in emotional intelligence, which we know that women tend to shine at more so than men.
I think what you're advocating there is extending mentor walks to men to help mentor men to be a little bit more empathetic and perhaps have broader skills. But no,
I think men need to be absolutely part of this equation to fix and to support the change that is taking place.
Well, I actually wanted to ask about that because we do hear that we need to bring men along the journey with preaching to the converted. But I wonder about that. You talk about redefining leadership, and I'm really starting to wonder, because isn't it the case, and I'm interested if you have data on this, isn't it the case that where women lead, where women are at the table, where they have power, that's where the real change works? Do you think we have to wait for men to let us in? Do you think we have to address the 7 drivers, mentor men, bring them along? I mean, if that's what we have to do, you can see why it's going to take some time. So how do you think we can help women redefine leadership in the way you talk about, in a way that's perhaps a little bit more above having to bring everyone with us, because that's just a long journey.
It is, and it's an exhausting journey, even having you reiterate it back. I really feel that that what purpose is very important to bringing teams to the table and getting teams to activate from a leadership perspective. Purpose for me is a big one that women can win on. And it's really interesting, but research shows that when women talk about, when they approach a goal that is lacking in purpose, it is lacking a greater sense of good, such as let's execute on that because it's going to benefit all these different cohorts, and this is the reason under it, and really show this support for the greater good, that those ideas are more likely to get take up and be successful than the ideas that the bold and brave woman comes up with on her own. She needs to nurture and bring the community along with her. And it's the same in our approach to leadership. It's unfortunate that we have to bring men along with us, but I look at that idea of purpose and what the research shows is effective. And I do think that it is important that we need to bring men along with us to support and to break through. I have to show you something, because when you spoke before, the business case is an argument that we should all be reiterating, whether it is to our immediate managers or whether it is just to ourselves to give us the confidence to push. The business case for female leadership is clear. It's something we're looking at all the time in building the impactor, is how companies perform when they hire more women. We know that where a female is the head of a company, a male subsidiary, or whatever you want to call him, second manager, is more likely to enjoy, have a better job performance and better engagement, greater productivity, as will a female in a similar role. So having that female in a head role is more likely to drive outperformance by a company. We've seen this time and time again through McKinsey and Co research. This table I'm showing right now, I believe, is coming from either Harvard, or I've got a couple of different ones of academic scholars that I'm looking at all the time. And it's consistent. The business case is there. So if we can talk about that for a moment, whether you're pitching yourself or you're asking men to come on board with this, the business case can't be ignored. So that would be a way that I would suggest we need to approach the reason why in our push.
Great, thank you. Now, Leslie Ann also has a guide, which sounds fantastic, for that you've shared with men, and they've been very receptive to it. So I think the concept of bringing colleagues with us and bringing along the journey is clearly resonating. Please make sure that you ask questions. We've got plenty of time for questions. Bianca, did you want to talk to this slide?
I did, because you also spoke about, well, what else? And there's two things that we know tend to create the best environment for women to thrive in leadership. And it's the need for having those essential soft skills, where we talk about personal development, which we spoke about before, being not only mentoring and networking and all those different things, those developmental things are critical, but that right enabling environment. So having a company that gets it, having a company that values the business case, where men are on board for the change, the long haul cultural structural change of a company. These two things, as simplified as they appear on screen now, are actually really critical for supporting female leadership. So if you're sitting here and you're kind of wondering, do I have this within my own company? Do I want to create this within my own company? I think they're two very valid things to be thinking right now. And it's certainly interesting to me as a business leader myself about whether I'm creating the right enabling environment. I sure hope I am from a role modeling point of view, but all those essential soft skills that we face that include defeating things like imposter syndrome, that ability to speak up in meetings, have your own voice and champion your own voice, are all really very critical things. But I think they also show that it's not just up to women to make change. It really is a matter of a broader organizational effort
Thank you. And again, questions, anyone, or comments or thoughts? Caroline has said you like to call them essential or human skills rather than soft skills. And I think that's a good pointer. Thank you. Bianca, what's it like to be an entrepreneur? Do you feel like you're an entrepreneur, a leader, a CEO without constraints? Your work is around gender and diversity, equity and inclusion. But as you now run your own business, you mentioned you deal with board members and so forth. Tell us a little bit about how you navigate life as a juggling CEO and a very prominent advocate for diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, juggle is just, it sometimes just leaves me wanting to pull my hair out, to be frank. There's so much constantly to do, isn't there, as a working parent? And I've always said that if you want to be any good as a mum or good at your job, life is hard. And certainly for me, it's about trying to make things easier. As jovial as this example will sound, I've recently invested in one of those iRobots that vacuum my entire house and mop my whole house. It's about investing in things outside of the home too that actually support my own mental health. And when I talk about the business, for me, what's been really important is surrounding myself with people that are leaders and that actually want to mentor me along the way, and that I feel like I can learn from, and that can help the purpose of the company that I've created grow. And you're one of those people, Jo. And there's other people like Connie McKay who will, I know she won't mind this, but who'll say to me very directly what she thinks, that will call things out. So I feel like I get a real sense of outcomes and where I have to go with her. Then there's other people like academics I work with who are very considered in their idea of what should be next for the company. So there's all these different people that I really rely on from a leadership perspective. And in many ways, I spoke before about having a small team. I have a small team of contractors underneath me who help execute on various different projects, but above is probably equally the same, if not a greater size, even though the in terms of the hours spent collaboratively from everybody. So that top down, and I'm somewhere in the middle from a leadership perspective, really works for me to grow and to grow the business, to help delegate, to bring in ideas constantly, to grow the network, to grow personally and professionally, and to challenge me. I constantly need to be challenged, pulled up, reminded that, hey, you came across a bit like this. That was a bit terse, Bianca. You should have, I get that a lot. And it's something I have to be open to and admit I am absolutely not perfect. And as I said at the beginning, I've always seen myself as a leader, but am I the obvious leader? No, absolutely not. But I think there's something in just about every woman out there who knows that they can lead, that they just need to tap into. And if that's what they've got and they believe in that, then I just want to see more women and champion that effort as much as possible. And to manage the juggle, be it if you have kids at home, 3 with like myself, or you've got other commitments that you've got to do, or different things. Life is a constant juggle, but it's that showing up consistency that I think has just kept me going and kept me in the game.
Yeah. So some really good learnings there. Outsource as much as you can, if you can, and surround yourself with really good people that both nurture but challenge you, but most importantly, come from the right space. Yes. So they're only thinking about you and the business and what's best, despite the feedback. So I'm going to, there's a few questions here and we'll get to each and every one of them, but there's one in particular, because you talked about mentors, advisors, contractors and so on. There's one that just wanted to pick up a little bit more about what you said earlier on the conversation of coaching and mentoring, and there was a bit of lack of clarity. So there was a discussion about the impact of coaching and mentoring, and I think you said it isn't the silver bullet. But could you please explain that a little bit more, in line with what other effective ways are there to keep lifting women? You talked about your own personal experience, but could you just extend that a little bit to answer this question?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think I was just going back to my little table that I was looking at as I was talking about that. And there's this idea that those essential soft skills, those mentoring programs, if you get all this recipe right, then it should really help, right? And then you've got to lean into it and do all these different things. But it's actually, we're seeing more and more that that's not enough. It's critical to it, but it's not enough. You need to integrate leadership into your core identity, really see yourself and believe yourself to be that leader, and lead in your truth as a leader. The one thing that many people who are leaders that I've interviewed have said to me is that some of the greatest leaders that they have admired are not your typical leader. They just do it their way. And I find comfort in that. And I think as women, we should find comfort in that and not try to mirror ourselves on that masculine traditional profile or these different things there. There is those soft skills, that emotionally intelligent way, that integrating leadership into your core identity to create credibility, to be able to execute on authority, to have that purpose within that are all really, really important, I believe. And I hope that makes sense. I can delve more into those soft skills around imposter syndrome, because I think that is a big one too, but I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so SL has said, got it, thanks. So that was a good answer. Well done. Just going back to some of the other questions then, are there other companies who are the benchmark for female leadership? Do you know companies that are making that transition to a more diverse, equitable workplace?
Yes, I do. There are quite a few that are doing that from a global perspective. And there are quite a few that are pinkwashing, but we won't go there. What you need to look for in an organization is an organization that is delivering on transparency of leadership. So you need to see that there are women in those critical leadership positions. When you're doing your own analysis, there's this great website, and I'll try to find it. It actually it's a US-based website that allows you to go in and read anonymous reviews on companies. We don't really do that here in Australia, but certainly with the Impact at all we're working on, employees will have more feedback. But you really want to do your homework on those Glassdoor, that's it. Yeah, that's it, Tina. Thank you. Glassdoor is a great website to think about. Whether or not many Australian companies are on it, I don't think so. Anyway, websites like that give you a look into a company. You want to see women at the top. You want to know that in critical line feeder roles, there are women in those teams, that they're not representative of 1 in 10, which is currently what it is, averaging across the board. And if that is absent, you want to see that there are policies or measures or commitments in place to change that. So when I look at construction, for example, obviously we need to treat male-dominated industries like construction and some companies there differently, because there is an overwhelming number of men in key working roles and different things like that, as opposed to health. But you want to see in companies that, I might call out Mirvac or different things like that, that there are and have been pipeline efforts to increase leadership. So there are other companies, consultancies in Australia in the consultancy space that are, I don't know if it's okay for me to call out who they are, that are increasingly doing more on gender diversity and setting those frameworks in place. And these companies will be in greater demand into the future. You can read about employer of choices on WGEA's website. You'll soon in time be able to read about different ones that we'll measure from a D and E&I perspective on our platform. But you want companies that are hiring diversity managers. And I can tell you from a quick look at Seek, which I'm constantly scanning for diversity and inclusion managers, the numbers are up all the time. Just go on LinkedIn and just have a look at that. There is a focus there. There's a real need for companies to deliver on reports on this. So if a company's on the move, and that's the kind of company you want to be with. You want to be with a place that's taking diversity and inclusion seriously, because that allows you to play to your strengths as an inclusive leader, as a leader that's valued for their emotional intelligence, as a leader that wants to lead, that wants a crack, that wants to feel free to put their hand up and say, I'm here and I'm ready. So I feel like there's going to be, in the time of a skill shortage we're currently in, the chase for talent will increase. And the onus is really on us, if we want it, to seek out those companies and say, we're here, we're ready, because they're going to want to hire.
Thank you. And there's lots of comments coming through. Glassdoor is very good. And as a leader of an organisation, if there was ever a bad comment posted about us on Glassdoor, the whole organisation would go into a complete state of apoplexy and not necessarily look at the broader systemic issues. But they kind of just wonder why that particular person, who was a disgruntled employee, must have said whatever they said. And it kind of just didn't have the desired effect. I think we were becoming more mature about it, but I do know that lots of people do check it out before they join. So I think it's a good thing. Naere has offered to join us at the end and give us some tips. So we're going to hold you to that. Thank you. Someone's mentioned also, Natalie's mentioned WGEA. Just give us some thoughts on WGEA, because I know your thoughts on WGEA, and I know WGEA, which is the Workplace Gender Equity Agency, has tried to move the dial. But I think just really quickly, it'd be interesting to understand how you see WGEA and whether you think government reporting has been effective. And there's a follow-on question for that around targets. Should we be setting targets?
Government reporting is, I mean, it's got us to where we are, and progress is slow. So my views on it are that without real accountability, there's a lot of window dressing able to be done. And what we need to see is greater accountability, a greater layer of accountability in there. And we know that threatening to name and blame doesn't really work. We know that it provides short-term media spikes for those companies that are performing well. But in terms of the repercussions for companies that don't get on the list, it doesn't really do anything, because the employees that already work there, they already know it to be true. So what's really the benefit there? So there's strategies that need to be looked at that can improve processes, I think, without wanting to go too much into what it is that they do. But hopefully, with a new government and greater focus, things will ramp up some more. I could never criticize reporting and frameworks, because that's what I really believe needs to continuously happen. I just think we need that layer of accountability needs to be very deeply embedded in there, because there's such a risk of this pink washing where we're almost fooled into getting into these organizations where we know that it's still a struggle for us, and we really want more of the gold standard there. On quotas, which I think is what you were saying, or targets, I'm a fan of quotas. And the reason I am is because I've watched for too many years the lack of quotas not doing anything. We have voluntary targets that have been good up to a point, and then the momentum seems to drop. And quotas has become a bit of a dirty word. We haven't wanted to talk much about it. Some people get their back up about it, but I feel, well, let's call it something else then, but we need a target, clear targets, and not be afraid to say that this workplace has them in order to support more women in leadership. It's got to that point. We know it works overseas. We need to implement it here in Australia, and at a company level, and those companies that do, they will be the companies in time that will stand out as gold standard, and they will be where women will want to go to in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I thought we had a bit more time, and I'm really sorry to say that we have completely run out of time. So we could talk about this forever. And you've given us such a richness of data and ideas and thoughts about the leadership situation and what we can do to redefine what it is to be a female leader. So thank you. And over to you, Bobby.
I'll close very quickly. Bianca Hartge-Hazelman and Joanne Block, thank you so much for what you've brought to us today. Bianca, the work you're doing with Financy is so important, and all power to you as a female founder. We're right behind you, so well done. There are a lot of wisdoms in what you've said. I particularly like that you were not an obvious leader, and I think that that's true for so many women, and being obvious is something not to seek, but look within yourself. To everyone on this call tonight, this has been recorded. You can find it on the Mental Walks YouTube channel. Please do the survey that we'll send to follow up. And please also know that Mental Walks is happening around the country and also in New Zealand and Singapore, and everyone is welcome. So thank you to the Iconic for helping us bring this conversation series to you. And again, to Bianca, to Joanne, and to the Mental Walks team behind the scenes, thank you very, very much. Have a good evening, everyone, and see you next month.